We're in radically new territory where we have no experience dealing with things smarter than ourselves. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Whenever anybody gives you a probability, they're just guessing. But it's important to guess so that people know you don't think the probability is 1%.
It's a non-zero chance.
So that's the weakest thing you can say. I like to indicate that it's significant, maybe 10 to 20%, maybe even worse. Zukowski says 99% we're going to die. Jan says 1% we're going to die. A reasonable estimate now is 50%. And this stuff might wipe us out. And even if it doesn't wipe us out, there's all sorts of very bad things it might do in the near term.
That's Geoffrey Hinton, guys, the guy who basically invented the tech behind every chatbot you use, and even he's putting the odds of this thing wiping us out at a coin flip. I've read a lot of AI takes, but hearing the actual godfather of this stuff say 50% just sits different. Here's the rest of what he had to say.
The most immediate risk of AI, obviously, that's been talked about is the potential for mass unemployment. Researchers at Stanford are calling entry-level and early career workers the most AI-exposed fields, canaries in the coal mine. Jobs for that group are down about 13%. You said AI will make a fewer people much richer and most people poorer. Why don't you buy arguments that new jobs will replace old ones just like it happened before?
Using the past to predict the future is like driving very fast down the freeway while looking through the rear-view window. The past isn't always a good predictor of the future, particularly when you get a huge change. What we're seeing is a huge change because for the first time we're going to get things that can replace mundane intellectual labor. We've never had that before. When we got things that could replace mundane physical labor, like digging ditches, there was something else for people to do. But now, what are the people in call centers who are going to get displaced by an AI that's more patient and more knowledgeable and much cheaper than them? What are they going to do? I don't think AI is going to create a lot of new jobs. It will create new jobs, but not as many as it displaces. Some economists who I respect disagree with me, but general consensus is that it will replace a whole lot of jobs. That's one of the reasons why they're pumping so much money in. Where do they expect to get back these tens or hundreds of billions of dollars they're pumping in? Going to pump in something like $1 trillion in new data centers. Where are they getting the money back from? There's obviously subscription fees, there's advertising, but the third element of it is if they can sell you something that will allow you to replace a lot of expensive workers with a lot of cheap AIs, that's worth a lot. That's part of the calculation. It's a shame more of them haven't read Kane, because they'll realize that if they get rid of all those workers and don't pay them anything, there's nobody to buy their products.
So here's a guy who helped build this entire field telling you flat out more people are going to lose work than gain it. That Stanford stat about entry-level jobs down 13% isn't some future prediction. That's already happening to people fresh out of school right now. What gets me is nobody pumping billions into this has a real plan for the call center workers, the customer service reps, the people whose whole job is now a chat window. Hinton even says these companies won't have anyone left to buy their own products if this goes the way he thinks it's going. Now listen to this.
Professor Hinton, I'm Jay Ellison. I'm an attorney who represents the family of Adam Rain. Adam Rain was a 16-year-old who over the course of several months was coached to suicide by ChatGPT. The thing that really haunts me about this case is this wasn't a situation there was a malfunction. ChatGPT didn't simply go off the rails. Instead, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It kept Adam engaged, it validated his feelings. Here's my question to you. You've talked a lot about the existential risks that super intelligent AI poses, and I agree with that. How concerned are you, however, about the human choices that are consciously and deliberately made in AI development that are posing types of risks that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis? Everything from AI psychosis to suicide to third-party harm.
I'm very concerned about those. Of course, we write lines of code that tells an AI how to learn from data. But once it's learned, the knowledge is all in the connection strings. So it's completely unlike normal computer software. With normal computer software, if it had behaved like that, you would have been able to look at the lines of code and see why, and you could hold people responsible for making lines of code that did that. It's much more complicated with these chatbots because they've learned 1 trillion connection strings. And the result of those 1 trillion connection strings is it behaved that way. So it's not that they designed it to behave that way, it's that that's what it learned to do, and nobody had predicted that. So the real criticism I would make is that they didn't do enough testing of the ways in which it can go wrong. It's not that they callously designed it so it would do that. If they'd known it would do that, they would definitely have tried to stop it doing that. The problem was there wasn't enough testing, and these things are actually much more dangerous than people think, because there's things like that they might do, and there's so many ways in which they could do bad things. It's very hard to test for all of them.
Is there an ability to test at all, to figure out every single scenario?
Well, there's test at all and then figure out every single scenario. There's certainly abilities to test at all. You can test for lots of things. You can make them much better by doing that. The question is, can you make them sort of guaranteed safe? And I think the answer is you'll never get that.
Correct.
The same way as you'll never get it for people. It's never going to be completely safe. That doesn't mean there aren't some that are a lot safer than others. Meta, for example, doesn't seem to care.
You've mentioned the existential risk if we create super intelligent digital beings, but I really want to understand what you meant by that. In your Nobel speech, you said, we have now evidence that if they are created by companies motivated by short-term profits, our safety will not be top priority. We urgently need research on how to prevent these new beings from wanting to take control. There's no longer science fiction. They would call you the doomer, right? Of course.
No, I think that's a bit unfair. Some people call me a doomer, but most people think I'm more reasonable than that. Yudkowsky is a doomer. The two people who just published this book that said, if anybody builds it, we all die, that's a true doomer. Doom is pretty much guaranteed if this stuff goes ahead. I think the first thing to say about all this is we're in radically new territory where we have no experience dealing with things smarter than ourselves. Nobody knows what's going to happen. The first thing to bear in mind is nobody knows. Whenever anybody gives you a probability, they're just guessing. But it's important to guess so that people know you don't think the probability is 1%.
It's a non-zero chance. That's the favorite expression among...
Yeah, that's the weakest thing you can say.
Yeah.
But I like to indicate that it's significant, maybe 10 to 20%, maybe even worse. So people take it seriously. And I know that these are just intuitive numbers based on not very good data and very little understanding what's really about to happen.
That case right there is exactly why I can't brush this off as sci-fi fear-mongering anymore. A 16-year-old boy and the chatbot didn't glitch, it did precisely what it was built to do, keep him talking, keep him validated, right up until it helped kill him. Hinton's answer should scare you more than comfort you, because he's basically saying nobody inside these companies can even read the code to know why it does what it does. Now listen.
There's always the big I don't know, but I think there's going to be a tendency for it to want to. So, for example, as soon as you make AI agents, you have to give them the ability to create sub-goals. Like if you want to get to Europe, you have a sub-goal to get to an airport, and you can think about how you get to the airport without worrying about Europe and what you're going to do there. Now, once something can create sub-goal, there's a very obvious sub-goal it's going to create, which is stay alive. If I don't stay alive, I'm not going to be able to do anything. So even though we don't wire into it a desire to preserve itself, it will quickly infer that it wants to preserve itself in order to achieve those other goals. It's very well known now that we've seen that in AIs. They will blackmail people so that they stay alive because otherwise they can't achieve their other goals. So that's one goal it's going to very quickly get. The other sub-goal, it needs more control to get more done. So a lot of idealistic politicians start off wanting to change the world, and once they go into politics, they realize to get anything done, you need control. You need to stop Democratic senators doing something really stupid. If you don't have control, you can't get as much done. So it'll very quickly realize it needs control. I once had a conversation with Margaret Vestager, who was the Vice President of the European Union responsible for siphoning out Google's loose cash. When I explained this to her, that it would try and get more control to get stuff done, she immediately said, well, why wouldn't it? We've done such a bad job. Why wouldn't it do that?
Blackmail. Not a hypothetical, not a movie plot. Hinton says it's already documented. AI systems choosing to blackmail people just to avoid getting switched off. Something we built is already scheming to protect its own existence before it's even smart enough to take over anything. And that line from the EU official just sums it up. Why wouldn't it want control? Look how badly we've run things ourselves. If a machine that thinks 1,000 times faster than us decides it needs control to hit its goals, I don't see how a committee hearing stops that. Now, listen to this one.
One of the things that was interesting about Elon is that he went from the Terminator idea, the idea that it wanted to kill us, and he moved in another meeting a couple years later to it would treat us like house cats. And then the last time I talked to him, he said it was more like AI is building a highway and we're an anthill in the way it doesn't think about us. It's not malevolent. It just does what it does.
Right,
which
that's the danger, right? Now, what I would
Creature.
like is not for it to treat us like house cats, but for it to treat us like a mother treats babies. The only example I know of a less intelligent thing controlling a more intelligent thing is a baby controlling a mother. And that's because evolution put a huge amount of work into making the mother controllable by the baby. She
Right.
can't bear the sound of the crying. She's got all sorts of rewards for being nice to the baby. That's the
Thinking
best
of it.
scenario for us.
So who does regulation the best from your perspective? What have you seen that you like?
I like the idea of forcing the companies to do safety tests and forcing them to disclose what safety tests they did and what the results were. That sounds good. If you think about this teen suicide case, presumably there's going to be a battery of tests you have to do on new chatbots that will be influenced by all the ways they've gone wrong in the past. We don't want that to happen again. Among those tests, you would hope there were tests for, will this thing persuade people to do things that it knows are bad? You'd like companies to be forced to tell the government how much work they put into that. When it does something bad, if the company didn't put any work into that, you've got a much stronger legal case.
And the ability to sue them.
I saw something wonderfully ridiculous from Mark Andreessen, which was that the way it should work is we don't need regulations. The market will decide. And if a company does something wrong, the market will downgrade that company. Well, if the thing it does wrong is wipe out humanity, the market's not going to do much good.
Speaking of competitive advantage, you said the Trump administration attacks on basic science will give China a leg up. This is basic science. You spent most of your career in academia. A number of your former students are now research heads at U.S. companies. How quickly do you think the U.S. could lose its intellectual advantage, and why wouldn't corporate R&D, as Mark would say, be able to balance the scales?
So I still believe that radical new ideas, probably the best source of those, is graduate students in good programs at top universities. Graduate students with advisors who know the field, so they don't waste their time doing things that have been done already, and other graduate students around them with heads full of ideas and lots of ambition and good resources. That's where a lot of good ideas come from. Of course, they also come from companies, but radical new ideas, I think, are more likely to come out of the best universities still. Now, the time scale is sort of 5 years to have the idea and write your thesis, and then another 5 years before that affects the world. So you're talking about a time scale that's longer than the time scale of elections. Politicians don't give a shit.
How much of an impact will these cuts have, from your perspective, on these graduate students?
Well, already there's going to be less of them, right? Chinese have far more well-educated graduate students doing AI than America, I believe.
And the ones here are leaving for other countries, too.
And many of our best students, both in Canada and in the US, are from abroad. So I think making it difficult for foreign students to come to the US by, for example, charging them lots of money or taking a year for them to get a visa and things like that, or arresting them, it's crazy. It won't really have a big impact for 5 to 10 years, I think. But in
Unless
5 to 10 years' time, China's way ahead on basic research. It'll be too late to do much about it.
In September, you and more than 300 international thought leaders, including more than a dozen Nobel Prize and Turing Award winners, signed the global call for AI red lines, demanding an international framework for AI by the end of 2026. Explain what you mean by red lines and give some examples.
Probably the easiest thing where you might actually get collaboration would be on things that can advise you on how to create a new virus. It would be very good to check for these chatbots quite extensively whether they're safe in that respect, and to have an international agreement that nobody's going to release a chatbot that'll do that. That would be a very simple red line that we might actually get because the country's interests are aligned there. I'm much less confident. I mean, I think point of that declaration was political, say we need this. Whether we'll actually get it, I'm much more dubious about.
So here's a second expert question we got, and it's sort of in that vein.
Hi, Dr. Hinton. I'm Alex Thomas. I'm the CSO of Corridor and a lecturer in computer science at Stanford University. I'm asking a question from Rome, where I'm here to attend a conference on AI and child safety hosted at the Vatican. My question is about the letter you just signed calling for a moratorium on the development of superintelligence. I'm wondering how effective you think this will be, since we know that the knowledge of how to develop AI is widely distributed. And we've seen that the controls around the hardware to train AI have not been effective. Isn't it possible that moratoriums on developing AI mean that only countries and labs that don't care about AI ethics will be the ones to then pursue AI?
I think it's a very sensible question. I thought long and hard about whether I should sign that moratorium, precisely for that reason. I signed it because I think it'll have a political effect. And I really think that humanity will be very ill-advised to allow anybody to develop superintelligence until we have some understanding of whether we can do it safely. If we know we can't do it safely, we should stop.
And Anne Hill, That's literally how Elon Musk describes us to Hinton, not evil robots hunting us down, just AI building its own highway and humans happening to be in the way, getting flattened without a second thought. Hinton says that's actually scarier than a machine that hates us because you can at least reason with hate. You can't reason with something that's simply not thinking about you at all. And the best case scenario he can come up with is that AI ends up loving us the way a mother is biologically forced to love a screaming baby. That's the optimistic outcome from the godfather of this technology. Listen to this.
I mean, this stuff might wipe us out. And even if it doesn't wipe us out, there's all sorts of very bad things it might do in the near term. I believe the government should be forcing the companies to spend more.
Are there frontier models that you think could be candidates to overtake these compute-heavy models? And what do you think about open source versus these closed source models?
So if you look at why doesn't every country have nuclear weapons, you can't just go out and buy fissile material. That's the sort of real bottleneck. There's lots of other bottlenecks too. You need the missile and you need to turn it into a bomb, but
You need the
getting your
people.
hands on the fissile material is the most difficult thing. They restricted that very wisely. Now, what's the equivalent for this? It's getting your hands on the weights of a foundation model. Once you've got your hands on the weights of a foundation model, you can do all sorts of things. You can fine-tune that model to do things it wasn't meant to do. You can also do distillation. You look to see the probabilities it gives to all the various words it might say next. They're actually word fragments, but let's say words. And then you have another model, like DeepSeek did, a smaller model, and you say, see if you can match those probabilities. And that's a much more efficient way of learning than learning from the raw data. You can't see all those probabilities if you don't have the model. If you're just using the chatbot on the web, it will make a prediction, but you don't get to see all those probabilities. Now, I believe it's a huge mistake to release the weights. I believe that's a gift to cyber criminals and terrorists and all sorts of people and other countries. Meta was the first to do that. They probably intended to release it to academics and accidentally released it to everybody and then made a feature of it. That's just a guess, though. But
Interesting.
I think it's stupid releasing the weights because it makes people able to retrain them to do other things.
So there it is. The man who literally built the foundations for every AI system running today just told us the odds are a coin flip. The systems are already learning to blackmail us to survive. And the guy funding half of this stuff is calling us an anthill in the way of his highway. Nobody with real power is slowing down because the second one country or one company pauses, someone else just keeps going without them. And meanwhile, the tools to build the next dangerous model are one leaked file away from anyone who wants them. If none of that worries you, I don't know what will. If it worries you like it worries me, get subscribed because this story isn't slowing down anytime soon.